This is the Yandy Project Podcast, episode number 2. Welcome to the Yandy Project Podcast. Our focus is on inspirational stories, tools, and tips for those 50 and over. I'm your host, Nadine O, and today we are joined by author Joaquin Bowman. Thank you, Joaquin Bowman, for joining us today on the You Are Not Done Yet podcast.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be able to do this.
And for our audience today, Joaquin Bowman is a former director of public relations and advertising for SEPTA. And he's also a Temple alumni, just like
I
me.
am.
And so
I'm
we're
proud and very proud of it.
very, very proud of it. And I'm just so excited to be able to sit down and talk to you because I've heard some amazing things about you from a friend of mine.
Tell me what they are, because I'm not sure I did anything amazing.
Well, I've heard that you've been a little bit busy in your past, the past 20 years since retirement.
I have.
Yes.
Yes, I have.
Okay. Now, you retired as a public relations and advertising director for SEPTA.
And that was my main career. Looking back over my 50 years of since I started working, SEPTA really was where I spent most of my working career, and where I feel I really made my mark as a professional.
Mm-hmm. And you were there how many years?
I was with SEPTA for 24 years, but after I graduated from Temple, I had been working in broadcasting at WDVR, which is now B101, for 3 years while I was at Temple. And then when I left WDVR, I had graduated from Temple. I was married, and we were expecting our first child, and so I needed to actually get a real job where I could make a paycheck that would provide for my family. And I took a job in industry at the Leeds and Northrop Company. And I was working as an industrial editor, which meant I put out the company magazine. It was a monthly magazine. I knew absolutely nothing about putting out a magazine because my training at Temple was in broadcasting.
Interesting.
But I sort of needed the job.
Right.
And it was a good job with benefits, and provided medical care for my family, and at that point we were expecting our first child. And I had the good fortune of working for one of the most incredible individuals I had ever met in my lifetime, and we're still very, very good friends and still work together on projects. He's 90, will be 97 years old shortly. And I was lucky to have met Tom Hickey. And I was lucky that he saw something in me that I really didn't see in myself. And that was the ability to write, to do layout, to do photography.
Wow.
To produce a monthly magazine that went out to 3,000 employees across the country. And I have to say, I think Tom had more faith in me than I had in myself. And when he offered me the job, I took it. And he gave me, he was my mentor, and gave me some advice on how to do it.
Right.
And then he stepped back and said, well, now do it. You're on your own. And I had to adapt. I had to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when I look back over my life, I'm 71 now.
Mm-hmm.
But when I look back over my life and the experiences I had, even as a child, where we moved frequently and I had to adapt from one group of kids to another, to one school to another,
Mm-hmm.
all the way from Los Angeles to Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
and back again, and then back again. My parents moved frequently.
Mm-hmm.
That I learned to adapt. And so I used those skills that I had in my first job.
Mm-hmm.
And we were required to have the magazine published and distributed on the first working day of each month. There were no excuses accepted.
Wow.
And in the 3 years that I published that magazine for Leeds and Northrop Company, it was called The Cooperator.
Mm-hmm.
I never missed a deadline.
You can't miss a deadline.
I never missed a deadline.
Yeah.
That magazine was available to the employees the first working day of every month.
Wow.
For every year I worked at Leeds and Northrop.
Wow.
And I always felt that if you told me this is what the job is,
mm-hmm.
and if these are the expectations, I will meet those expectations. And I always felt that I had the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a quality, it's a talent, whatever you want to call it, that is within myself.
Mm-hmm.
That if I say I will do this, you have my word that I will do that, and it will be done. So Tom put his faith in me, and he did several times over my working career, because I worked for Tom twice. I worked with Tom at Leeds and Northrop Company. He gave me my first opportunity as the professional after graduating from Temple. I worked for Tom for 3 years. Then he went to SEPTA. I went to SKF Industries that made bearings. Worked at Frontieri in Philadelphia. And I began not only Tom was teaching me the public relations skills at SKF Industries. I also learned advertising skills. So things kind of developed, and I worked for SKF for 3 years. And then Tom, who had, like I said, been at SEPTA, hired me at SEPTA as a manager for public relations. And I represented SEPTA mainly with the news media in that job. And again, I had to learn, because I really wasn't dealing with the news media in prior jobs. I had to learn, how to do press releases, how to speak to the media, how to represent a major organization with the media. So again, I had to adapt.
That's really interesting. I find that the key thing is learning new things, that you are continually putting yourself or being placed in situations where you had to learn something new.
And again, Nadine, I think that goes back to my early childhood. I was born in Los Angeles, and we lived there a couple of years, and my parents, who were from the East Coast, decided to move back to Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia area. And, I was constantly yanked from one place to another. I learned to make friends. I learned to talk to people. I I learned how to be accepted into the clusters of people that I dealt with. And then we would move back to Los Angeles, and from Los Angeles move back to Philadelphia. My parents really couldn't decide which coast they wanted to live on.
Hot, cold, they couldn't decide.
Hot, cold, whatever. Well, their family was here. Their family was also in Los Angeles. And, I was born in 1944, and there was a lot of opportunity in Los Angeles for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
My father was a tool and die maker. My mom was basically a stay-at-home mom. And so that I think they enjoyed the process of moving.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure they really gave a lot of thought to the idea that my brother and I, and eventually my two sisters, weren't going to have long-time friends because we were constantly on the move.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I learned some skills in that process.
Well, I want to take a moment to address our listeners by saying thank you. You are listening to You Are Not Done Yet podcast. I'm Nadine Ho, your host, and we are joined by Joaquin Bowman, author and photographer. But he says he's just a generalist. Joaquin, thank you again for joining us here. And we were talking about change and the tools that we carry with us throughout life to adjust to situations and changes that we may experience. I would like to talk to you about retiring and what got you into writing some of the books that you have written, such as Tadville.
Well, there's a story. There's always a story behind the story, right?
Yes. What's your story?
Well, huh?
What's your story?
Oh, my goodness, I don't know where to begin.
We have time.
My brother and I had, as I said, an unusual childhood, both of us, because we were moving constantly. And I can't say that my brother and I were close. We were 2 years apart, but he would not really consider me his friend.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't understand why my brother could not accept me.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of something that bothered me for my entire life with my brother. And, my brother died when he was 52.
Mm-hmm.
I was 49 when he
Mm-hmm.
died. And I couldn't feel an attachment to my brother, even though I tried. I really wanted him to love me and to be my friend, but I never felt that was part of our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until after I retired from SEPTA in 1996. My brother had died in 1994. And I started teaching. My wife was a teacher, and she still had some time to go before she retired. So I decided to try something totally new. And I accepted a job with the Central Bucks School District as a long-term substitute teacher, which meant I worked practically every school day I worked. And I did this for 6 years. But in the process of doing that, I had met an individual who was a school counselor. His name is Dave Sears,
Mm-hmm.
who I talked to at length about my brother and how I could never feel a bond to him. And we started talking about Asperger's and autism And I was working with kids who were on the autistic spectrum, doing work in special education with the school district. And I saw some parallels, actually, between some of the kids I was working with and some of the things that I saw in my brother. And I really give the credit to Dave Sears for turning me on to things that books I should read, people I should talk to. And I wanted to try to find any parallels between kids with Asperger's and the way that my relationship with my brother had developed, and whether Asperger's or some degree of autism could have been involved in our relationship.
What did you find?
Pardon me?
What did you find out?
Well, the more I researched, and I read the books that Temple Grandin had written and others, and I could really see that there was something going on with my brother, and I also suspect my mother, that had to do with Asperger's, which, is on the autism spectrum.
How is Asperger's different from just autism, the basic? I know there are different spectrums.
That's a very good question, and it's actually a part of science that I think is evolving, where they're finding more and more kids fall somewhere on the autism spectrum, and they keep, at one point it was 1 in several hundred, and now they're finding it may be 1 in less than 100 kids will be on the autism spectrum. And they're using the word Asperger's yet less today than before, and they're really trying to fit the symptoms or the way that people act into some level of the autism spectrum.
Okay.
I know it sounds confusing, but when my brother was born, he was born in 1942, and his actions were unusual, even at that time. And I'm not going to get into a lot of detail because
no,
we don't
I
have
understand.
time. But you could see that he was different, and even though he had a family and he was a teacher in Philadelphia, a graduate of Penn State, that there were problems with his interaction with people and with his family, and I was part of the family too. And that led me to do a lot of research on the subject, and it also led me to write the first book that I wrote, which is called Tadville. Tadville was really his world. His name was Thaddeus. We called him Tad. And he really, as children, we had an imaginary sort of a little town that we created. And like I said, we moved so much that even though he didn't like me very much, that I was his companion. And we created this little town that we could carry from Burbank, California to Philadelphia, and the little town was called Tadville.
Cute.
And he was always, of course, the top dog. He would either be the mayor or the head of city council, and I would be, serving him in some capacity or another.
Of course. You're the younger brother.
And, it's a long story, which you don't have the time to get into, but it's a long story, and what I found is that my brother had Asperger's. And today they would really say that he had some form of autism. He was was on the autism spectrum.
Okay.
He was very functional.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, he was married, had 4 kids, taught, but he had a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1994, he died of a stroke. Things had changed on his job.
Mm-hmm.
Kids were getting older. He was having more and more difficult keeping control of
Mm-hmm.
his environment.
Mm-hmm.
And he was having health issues, and then he died. And after his death, I was trying to put all the pieces together. You know, I was devastated by the loss of my brother, and I was trying to put the pieces together. Well, what was different about my brother?
Mm-hmm.
And that led me to write the book Tadville, which describes our relationship and things about my brother that if you read the book, you see that, well, this was rather strange. That was rather strange. There are different things that were very, very unusual about my brother. And I talked to several professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And one psychologist who deals with young people who are autistic said that there are no two that are alike. That if you met one kid who had Asperger's, we'll use the term Asperger's. If you met one kid with Asperger's, that kid is totally unique. You've met one kid with Asperger's. You can't say that there's another one like him or her. That each one is an individual. And my brother certainly was an individual. And he had his own idiosyncrasies,
Mm-hmm.
Which I found later that really, when you look down through our family tree, that it really was passed from one generation to the next. And as I say, I suspect my mother had some form of autism, or if we want to use the term Asperger's, which
Mm-hmm.
would be a milder form of autism. I think she did.
Wow. So you wrote this book, Tadville, inspired by your relationship with your brother.
Right.
And it's been published. You self-published this book yourself.
I self-publish because I guess I'm thin-skinned. First of all, I don't consider myself to be, a grade A writer. I can write, but I don't consider myself to be a professional writer.
But it's your story. It's your story. It is your story.
Well, it's my story, but it's not a story that would appeal to a lot of people, and maybe it could be better told.
Well,
in 2010, I published Tadville.
Mm-hmm.
I had stopped teaching after my wife retired. She retired in 2003 as she was a trained professional teacher, high school teacher. And I retired from teaching in 2004 and published Tadville in 2010. So I really put a lot of work into my research and to talking to people
Mm-hmm.
to try to figure out what was going on within our family.
Right.
And then I decided to publish. Of course, all first-time writers out of the box want to have a mainstream publisher. And I tried,
Mm-hmm.
but like I say, I don't consider myself a writer. So
Mm-hmm.
I really was trying to partner with somebody
Mm-hmm.
to write my story. And I wasn't having a lot of luck, getting someone to say, well, I'll work with you on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to self-publish.
Wow.
And I did. And I'm glad I did. Because, once the book was published, I felt a sense of relief.
Mm-hmm.
And I also also was able to work with other family members who were also scratching their heads about my brother and why he died when he as early as he did. And we put our heads together, and I worked with a neuropsychologist on the subject, and others who dealt with kids with autism and Asperger's, and put the story together. And I felt a great sense of relief once it was published.
You know, Joaquin, listening to you talk about this, I just think it's so wonderful that not only you produced a book about your story, but that it's out there for other people that might be going through something similar.
Well, you know, Nadine, it was something that I had thought that would be important for people. And I know there are a lot of families who are struggling with their kids who are on the autism spectrum. And I've met a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of people, and I'll give my book to people who would like to read it. It's also available on Amazon, but you know, I've given away many books to people who have children who have some degree of autism, and I think it's been helpful. I hope it's been helpful, and I saw that as the reason to do it. I never did it with the idea, well, this is going to make me money. I did it because I had to do it for myself and for our family, and I did it to help others. And hopefully there's been some benefit from doing the book, other than just for myself and our own family members, for people outside the family.
Well, I definitely think that it's done more. I mean, if there's anyone out there listening today, they may know someone who, or they may be in that position where they've wondered, why is my kid, it could be on a lower spectrum of autism, that it's a little bit off or different compared to their other siblings, and that is okay, and that their child can grow up and have a meaningful life and help others and have a good job and have a family. And sometimes I think families or parents feel as though that's a death wish in a sense. And I just think that's wonderful. And I'm looking at the time, and I think this would be a good time to break away and maybe return on the second half to talk about your favorite or your most accomplished piece of work that you're the most proud of. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin. Well, if you're listening, and I hope you are, you're listening to You Are Not Done Yet podcast. I am Nadine O, your host, and we have been listening to an interview with Joaquin Bowman, my new friend. And I just want to take this time to thank you for joining us on this first half of the podcast. For all those listening, please check out the second half. We're going to get into some juicy details about one of his most proudest, or he holds the most pride in terms of his written creations. And so thank you very much. And you can also pick up Tadville by Joaquin Bowman on Amazon at amazon.com. Like what you hear? Just trek over to our website at yandyproject.com. You can leave a comment there. We'd love to hear from you. And whatever you do, subscribe so you can stay informed on the latest posts and updates of our podcast. See you there.